the most notorious Hells Angels members reacting to life sentences.
And there was an outburst in the courtroom this morning as closing arguments were being heard in the triple murder trial of a member of the Hells Angel Motorcycle Club.
The infamous Hells Angels biker gang, founded in the 40s by World War II veterans and renowned as one of the most dangerous outlaw motorcycle gangs ever in the world. Despite their club image, members of this club have been involved in numerous kidnappings, extortions, and murders. But how do these notorious bikers feel about being convicted for their heinous crimes? Join us as we reveal the most notorious Hells Angels members reacting to life sentences. Joseph Lancha.
28-year-old Joseph Lancha of Greenville, identified as the president of the Rhode Island chapter of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, charged with 4 counts, including assault with a deadly weapon and firing in a compact area.
To begin, meet the president of the Rhode Island Hells Angels, Joseph Lancha. He was strongly against allowing Richard Steinino to join the club. Richard was a prospective member, and all Hells Angels prospects must complete numerous tasks to earn the gang's trust before being officially inducted. However, if the president does not want you in, that's a major issue. Joseph and Richard had an ongoing conflict, although the cause is unknown. In 2019, Joseph shot at Richard in an attempt to murder him. The bullet struck the passenger side of the vehicle, but no one was injured. At the time of the shooting, there were children in the vicinity, and a school was located across the street. CCTV footage captured the incident near the Hells Angels Providence clubhouse, and the clubhouse itself shared the footage with the police. Lancha was arrested 3 hours after the alleged shooting, and later that day, a state police vehicle known as a Bearcat rammed into the clubhouse late Thursday afternoon to serve a search warrant. The state police stated they had to use such force because the building was known to be reinforced. It turns out that not the entire chapter was on the wrong side of justice. Joseph was also convicted of discharging a gun while committing a crime of violence and assault with intent to commit murder during the trial. Now, as the president of the Hells Angels in Rhode Island, Joseph Lancha changed his plea in court after reaching a deal with prosecutors. He pleaded no contest to felony assault and battery charges and carrying a gun without a license. As part of the deal, the more serious charges of discharging a firearm while committing a crime of violence and assault with intent to commit murder were dismissed. Thus, the new charges were dropped after he reached the deal with the prosecutors, resulting in a light sentence of 5 years. When Joseph Lancha's lawyer, Joseph Vacola, was asked why his client changed his plea, he stated that they believed it was in his best interest to do so and that Lancha wanted to put these matters behind him. Consequently, Superior Court Judge Kristen Rogers sentenced Lancha to 5 years in prison, followed by 10 years of probation on the gun case and a suspended 3-year sentence after he assaulted an off-duty bouncer at the Cadillac Lounge strip club while on bail. Upon hearing his sentence, Lancha remained stone-faced, showing neither gratitude nor remorse. When asked if he had anything to say, he replied with a brief and stern no. Lancha will be on probation for a full 10 years following his release, and he will be required to stay away from Richard Steinino, the truck driver he attempted to murder. However, that is a minor consequence, considering he was reportedly facing up to 61 years in prison if found guilty at trial. Perhaps his stoic reaction in court and lack of apology were influenced by the presence of around 12 Hells Angels members who were with him during his final moments of freedom. In a culture of aggressive masculinity, where violence is often the solution, a Hells Angels president could never display emotion or remorse in court, ironically not recognizing that it is precisely such unchecked emotions that lead to violent incidents of this kind. Adam Lee Hall. This next case is indeed more gruesome than the last, so prepare yourself. During Hurricane Irene in Springfield, Adam Hall and 2 fellow Hells Angels kidnapped, tortured, and murdered 3 men from Pittsfield, an act that was horrific in every sense. At the Hampton Superior Court in Massachusetts, Adam Lee Hall was sentenced to 3 life terms for the brutal murders. He was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and kidnapping in 2014. Hall, along with his accomplices, David Shalo and Caius Vass, were all found guilty of first-degree murder. The three men were convicted of shooting David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell at Glasser's home in Pittsfield. After dismembering the bodies, they placed them in plastic bags and transported them in Hall's Buick to a remote area in Beckett, where they buried the remains in a ditch. The victims were last seen alive on the evening of August 27, 2011, and their mutilated bodies were discovered 13 days later. As the trial began, witnesses started to testify, including Hall's ex-girlfriend, who revealed that on the night of the 2011 murder, he had concealed 3 firearms in a bag of dog food. The motive behind these heinous acts was to prevent the victims from testifying in another case. During the trial, Rose Dawson testified that Hall visited her in the morning after the murders. Prosecutors alleged he murdered the 3 men in Berkshire County. Dawson recounted that Hall asked her to buy bleach to clean his Buick, and along with another witness, Alexandra Ellie, she helped wash the car, noting a brown liquid seeping out. Dawson also recalled an evening at the Hells Angels clubhouse, where Hall and others accused of the murders were allegedly mocking and laughing about the victims. Although investigators have not found the firearm Dawson described, the district attorney confirmed that the victims' remains had gunshot wounds. During the trial, the defense attorney attempted to undermine Dawson's credibility due to her past alleged substance use and questioned the evidence she could provide as a witness. However, Judge Jeffrey Kinder was not swayed by this tactic. Hall was not prepared to accept his involvement in the case. In fact, he felt insulted when the prosecutor presented evidence against him, causing an outburst on the morning of the prosecution. Paul interrupted the district attorney and cursed at him, claiming he was miles away from the victims at that time. But the judge did not take his outburst very lightly. Hall's trial lasted almost 4 weeks, and yet he never took the stand. Finally, there was a verdict. Adam Lee Hall was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder, extortion, kidnapping, intimidation of a witness, and a few other charges. During his trial, it was revealed that he personally tortured the 3 men, dismembered their bodies, and buried them. This trial was not without a bit of drama during the court proceedings, which drew a lot of media attention, mostly because of the notoriety of the Hells Angels. So much so that they ended up relocating the trial to Springfield from Berkshire County. For Hall's defense, his lawyers argued that he was innocent and simply being targeted for being part of the Hells Angels. Well, the jury did not buy that defense, as was evident in their ruling. As the verdict was being read, observers could hear crying in the background of the courtroom, and all Hall could do was put his head down in pain. He was not found guilty of kidnapping, but of first-degree murder. For that, he was given 3 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. But just like many members of the Hells Angels who face prosecution for various crimes, Adam Lee Hall stood emotionless as that sentence was read out loud 3 times. One for each of the 3 men Hall was convicted of murder. He was sent 5 consecutive life sentences, ironically reduced to 4 consecutive life sentences after his kidnapping charge was vacated, as if that made a difference to his future. However, that did not stop him from being smug throughout that hearing. Caius Vass. Next is the eccentric Caius Vass, who was among the Hells Angels members involved in the murder of David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell from Pittsfield. He was charged with murder in the first degree, kidnapping, and witness intimidation. However, Vass's alleged involvement in the act was not the only occurrence that drew attention to him. Caius Vass had implants in his forehead that looked like horns, green bones tattooed on his fingers, and the number 666 tattooed above his eyebrows. He was a self-proclaimed vampire and Satanist, and made sure both his body and name looked the part. Vass legally changed his name in 2008 from Roy Gutfinski Jr. to Caius Vass. Caius is a vampire in the Twilight series, and Vass is a Roman god often thought to be escaping from hell. He had previously had a stint with the law that honestly gives him the name Psycho, to say the least. In 1999, Vass and his girlfriend Deanne Jones made the news for allegedly assaulting a 16-year-old girl. According to prosecutors, they enticed the girl to their motel room where Jones cut open the girl's back with a razor blade. The couple then kissed each other and licked the girl's blood. The girl needed over 30 stitches in her 7-inch wound, and police were notified after she arrived at the hospital. At the trial, Vass identified himself as a Satan worshiper and vampire who craved both his own and others' blood. They were found guilty of elevated aggravated assault and reckless conduct in 2000. Vass received a 10-year prison sentence, with 3 years of his sentence served before being released. All of this was before he even became a Hell's Angel. Some years later, Vass was back in court with another stomach-turning murder. According to prosecutors, Vass helped 2 other men kidnap and shoot the victims to death, and the 2 other men were murdered to eliminate witnesses to one of the murders. Glasser, one of the victims, was set to testify against a Hell's Angels member in an assault case. Throughout the trial, Vass maintained his innocence and refused to talk to the police or accept any plea deals. The jury subsequently found him guilty of 3 counts of murder, kidnapping, and intimidation of a witness. One by one, all the verdicts were read, leading to Vass serving 3 life sentences without parole. His reaction? Vass did not take the sentencing lightly and had a very public outburst, screaming that he would see them all in hell. Who specifically he meant is unclear, but we can only assume Vass, with this last attempt at a rant, was referring to the prosecutor, judge, and jury who convicted him for his crimes. As Vass is sent to prison, the victims' families can finally begin to feel some closure. Curious about the identity of the 3rd Hell's Angels member involved in the Pittsfield murders? Stay tuned as we reveal the details next. David Shalo. Next up, we have David Shalo, who is 1/3 of the trio with Caius Vass and Adam Lee Hall, all involved in a murder. Shalo was charged with kidnapping and the murder of 3 men. Shalo, a 47-year-old from North Adams, is facing trial as the 2nd defendant in the 2011 triple homicide case, which drew national attention due to the horrifying nature of the murders.
Underway for the 3rd man accused in a horrific triple murder that rocked Berkshire County. Investigators say Caius Vass and 2 other men kidnapped, tortured, and dismembered the victims 3 years ago.
The disfigured remains of 3 Pittsfield men, namely David Glasser, Robert Chadwell, and Edward Frampton, were discovered in Beckett in August 2011. The police and prosecutors revealed that the victims were abducted, shot, and then mutilated. The prosecutors alleged that Shalo was one of the 3 men who executed the murders of Glasser, Chadwell, and Frampton. Shalo has denied the charges of murder and other related offenses. David Casey, a key witness in the case, described in detail how Shalo and his accomplice Hall butchered the 3 men, cutting their legs, hands, and heads off. One of them told him he slept soundly after ending the life of 3 victims. Shalo's lawyer argued that the witnesses who testified against the defendant were jailhouse informants, so were unreliable. According to the prosecutor, Hall, the primary suspect, desired Glasser's death to prevent him from testifying against him in a different case, while the other victims were murdered to erase potential witnesses. The Berkshire District Attorney, David Kaplis, recommended that 3 consecutive sentences be given to the accused since there is no possibility of parole. Hampton's Superior Court Judge, C. Jeffrey Kinder, accepted this recommendation, citing that each victim's value needed to be recognized. Kinder remarked that describing the defendant's conduct as heinous would be an understatement. The victims had been subjected to death in a depraved manner. Furthermore, Kinder noted that the defendant had preyed on the disabled and surrounded himself with young women whom he could manipulate. Kinder expressed that he would not hesitate to impose the harshest possible sentence in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Kaplis echoed Kinder's sentiments and urged the court to show no mercy to the accused, as Shalo had shown no mercy to the victims. After long deliberations on both sides, the jury gave their verdict. As the verdict was read by the judge, you could see the look of apathy on Shalo's face. He simply did not care. Shalo received 3 life sentences for his crime. However, David Shalo is not giving up. He wants his sentence overturned and has taken his case to the Supreme Court. Shalo appealed his conviction, citing several errors from the original trial that influenced the outcome. However, the Supreme Court rejected the appeal, stating that the verdicts of murder in the first degree are consistent with justice. During the appeal, Shalo's lawyer claimed that there were several errors made during the original trial that affected the outcome. Specifically, he argued that the judge gave improper instructions to the jury, allowed the admission of unfairly prejudicial character evidence, and rejected the prosecution's argument regarding statements made by Hall. Additionally, the appeal contended that the prosecution made multiple inappropriate statements during their opening and closing arguments. The court reviewed the 2013 trials and concluded that there were no grounds to overturn the convictions or reduce the sentences. Richard DeVries. Now we will take a trip down to Las Vegas, where Richard DeVries was taken into custody on felony charges, including racketeering. The reputed president of the Las Vegas Hells Angels, Richard DeVries, was arrested during a court hearing in October 2020. DeVries, along with 7 others, was indicted on racketeering charges linked to the May shooting on a Henderson highway. Some of the charges carry enhancements for promoting or assisting a criminal gang. The charges associated with racketeering include conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, battery, and discharging a firearm at or into an occupied structure. Prosecutors accused Hells Angels members, including DeVries, of opening fire and injuring 6 Vagos motorcyclists on May 29th on U.S. Highway 95, west of Wagon Wheel Drive. Prosecutors believed that the gunfire may have been in retaliation for a San Bernardino shooting that resulted in the death of a Hells Angels motorcyclist, although a Vagos member disputed this claim during a grand jury hearing in June. During Memorial Day weekend, a group of bikers, which included members of the Hells Angels, were on a ride through Arizona and northern Nevada. Evidence presented to the jury reportedly showed members of the Hells Angels at a Henderson Harley-Davidson dealership just moments following the shooting incident. Additionally, an individual identified by the police as an anonymous witness provided a video showing 3 men wearing clothing associated with the Hells Angels approaching the Vagos group, including one person who seemed to be holding an object in their left hand just before gunfire erupted. The police discovered multiple bullet casings that had been fired for over a mile along the highway. However, according to the police account, it was uncertain whether the Vagos group had fired any shots, or if all those reported injured had sustained gunshot injuries. 2 people were in critical condition and had been hospitalized. DeVries was initially arrested, along with Stephen Allo and Russell Smith, whom prosecutors have identified as prospects for the Hells Angels. However, the prospects were released from custody after posting $75,000 bail. During the indictment, the prosecutors accused the Las Vegas Hells Angels chapter of operating as a criminal syndicate over 3 years. Prosecutors claimed that DeVries was involved in directing, supervising, and financing the organization. He was also said to have incited violence or included others to do so to gain status within the hierarchy of the Hells Angels, or to target members of the rival Vagos Motorcycle Club. Later on, District Judge Tierra Jones denied a motion to recall an arrest warrant for DeVries. As the court proceedings were ongoing, Jones ordered DeVries to be taken into custody and set his bail at $250,000. Like most of the other Hells Angels members, DeVries showed no emotion and even appeared quite cooperative. Stephen Sanders. Stephen Sanders was once the proud president of the San Diego chapter of the Hells Angels, but in 2012, it all came to an abrupt end when he was arrested on a long list of charges, including multiple counts of armed robbery with gang enhancement and assaults.
I'm in here for multiple cases. I'm in here for armed robbery with a gang enhancement. I'm in here for assaults. I'm in here for Now there's so many cases.
In fact, when Sanders felt threatened by the case against him, he tried to have several people murdered so that they could not testify against him. In April 2012, Sanders pleaded guilty to charges of assault with a lethal weapon after he ambushed a group of partygoers in Pacific Beach. He also pleaded guilty to kidnapping 2 people for the benefit of a street gang, targeting rival gangs, officials, and even civilians. Eventually, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison for robbery, assault with force, kidnapping, and solicitation of murder. If you have been following these conviction cases of Hells Angels members being sentenced, you should have noticed a pattern by now. Just like all the others, Sanders never expressed any remorse. In fact, he was in the courtroom hearing his verdict when he said he felt pressured to plead guilty because he faced a tougher sentence if convicted at trial. During an interview with reporters, Sanders said he felt he was definitely targeted by the law enforcement agency, claiming that law enforcement officers were just flat out obsessed with trying to put him and other Hells Angels gang members in jail. He continued, mentioning that the district attorney's office was biased against them. However, Sanders did not seem to own up to his actions. His attorney even tried to withdraw his guilty plea on the grounds that there were new witness testimonies, but the motion was denied. The DEA had been on Sanders' tail for years and had strong evidence against him. The audio recordings the DEA had on Sanders were most damaging to his defense, but Sanders insisted that the conversations were manipulated to make him appear even more guilty, which was what ultimately convicted him.
Once they were manipulated and they had the conversations the way they wanted them, that's what ultimately convicted me.
It was considered a huge victory that he was off the streets. To this day, though, he maintains his innocence and tries to defend the camaraderie of his prized group, the Hells Angels. Jay Witt. In July 2013, Jay Witt, a Hells Angels member, had a strong dislike for one of the prospective members, 48-year-old William Furlong. One day, both men were seen on CCTV entering a Nebraska Hells Angels clubhouse. A few minutes later, only Witt came out. William's body was found later that day. Jay Witt then tried to flee in a stolen Chevy Impala, but was caught by the police. When the police pressed Jay Witt about the murder of Furlong, he claimed it was self-defense, even when all signs pointed to murder. However, without footage from within the clubhouse, Witt could only be charged with manslaughter, to which he pleaded no contest. According to Jay Witt's attorney, one of the reasons they took the plea to manslaughter was because there were some issues that needed to be resolved, and they thought it would assure them of a conviction for manslaughter rather than a trial where there were issues with regard to justification. Dawn Furlong, the wife of the victim, asked Judge Lee Ann Rettelsdorf to consider her husband's character beyond his affiliation with the motorcycle club. She described him as a loving family man who provided immense support and stability to their home. She urged the judge not to let stereotypes and appearance cloud her judgment and to understand the love and integrity her husband possessed. As he received his sentence of 30 to 40 years behind bars, Jay Witt remained cool and defiant towards those filming. It turns out Witt had an extensive criminal record, including assault, theft, substance possession charges, and illegal use of weapons. This was not his first time in prison, and he did not seem fazed by it at all. It just goes to show what a dangerous man he was indeed. It is reassuring to know that he will not be back on the streets until he is at least in his 70s. The Fresno Trio. In 2014, 3 Hells Angels gathered to murder one of their own. Fresno chapter president Brian Wayne Wendt of Tulare, Santa Rosa president Jonathan Nelson, and Russell Taylor Ott were found guilty of the 2014 murder of fellow Angels member Joel Silva. Once the 3 decided they needed to eliminate Joel, they hatched a disgusting plan. Russell lured him to Fresno under the pretense that he needed to fight with Brian to resolve their past issues. However, as soon as Joel arrived at the Hells Angels clubhouse in Fresno, Brian shot him in the head. Reports of the incident documented bullet holes in the side of the building where Joel's life was ended. As part of the investigation, Federal agents conducted searches in Santa Rosa and parts of Sonoma County, which resulted in the collection of valuable evidence. The three then bribed their way into bringing his body to a funeral home. When caught, Wendt, Nelson, and Ott were all sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While their reactions remain unseen on camera, something else makes this case truly worse than previously thought. According to a 2017 indictment, this is far from this Hells Angels chapter's only crime. This murder led to a longer FBI operation that uncovered a monstrous racketeering ring. Reportedly, the Sonoma County Hells Angels Division has been involved in some of the worst Hells Angels crimes, including racketeering, substance dealing, assault, obstruction of justice, and murder. 11 members were arrested on racketeering charges alone in 2017, which included robbery, extortion, and murder. It was clear from all the evidence gathered that the Hells Angels motorcycle gang used violence, fear, and criminal behavior for their own personal gain and greed. But even more was yet to come. After the FBI raided the Fresno clubhouse, they discovered even more evidence, which included multiple weapons, at least 10 motorcycles, substances, and garments that had human DNA and blood. These 11 Hells Angels members from California and one from Boston were indicted on multiple felony charges, including murder, maiming, home invasion, robbery, extortion, and witness tampering. Many of these horrific crimes were committed to enhance membership and discipline within the gang. One could genuinely wonder what sort of discipline that was. Well, whatever qualities the Hells Angels motorcycle gang were trying to instill in new members did not pay off. As it turns out, an informant within the Hells Angels chapter itself led to the massive arrest. Maurice Bue. Things are about to get more terrifying as we have saved the worst case for last. So buckle up, because here comes the story of Maurice Bue. It was reported that at the peak of his power in the mid-1990s, Maurice Bue was as dangerous and deadly as they come. Some have described him as probably the most vicious mob or crime boss America has ever seen. We have had a lot of bad ones, but Boucher's entire life is a criminal record. Maurice was born in 1953 in Kosciuszko, Canada, into a very poor family. He had 7 siblings, a brutal alcoholic father, and a mother who desperately struggled to hold her family together. His raging alcoholic dad worked in construction, an industry that was ruled by the mafia in a society where corruption was accepted as normal. So he learned that the more violent you are, the greater results you get. By 9th grade, he was a school dropout and heavily addicted to substances and alcohol. First came petty crimes, theft, and robbery to support his addiction. Then, in the early 1980s, he joined the SS, a white supremacist motorcycle gang. This is when the racially motivated crimes began. Later, Maurice wanted to join the Hells Angels in Quebec, and his membership with the SS put him high up in his candidacy. Within a few years, he became a top-tier tyrant. First, there was the Lennoxville Massacre. In March 1985, the Hells Angels summoned 5 of their members to a quiet town in Quebec's eastern townships, where they were slaughtered in one of the most notorious crimes ever committed in the province. This was a simple civil war, and an opportunity to create a power vacuum and fill the gap in Maurice's eyes. Maurice then created a new group within the Hells Angels called the Nomads. Under his rule, new members had to commit murder to be inducted. This was his way of guaranteeing no undercover cops would join his ranks. On July 13, 1994, 34-year-old Pierre Daoust was in his motorcycle shop working on his Harley when 3 men ambushed him and riddled him with 16 bullets. This was a message from a rival gang, the Rock Machine, to the Hells Angels. Maurice's response? He started a war that lasted 7 years and cost over 160 lives. One of the victims was an 11-year-old boy named Daniel Desroches. He was simply passing by when a car bomb detonated and the flying debris ended his life. Meanwhile, Bue also ordered the murder of 2 prison guards. They had been selected at random, but Maurice wanted to send a message to all those who were considering testifying against him. Maurice Bue was no better than Mexico's worst cartel kingpins, El Chapo or El Mencho. In the late 1990s, Bue was arrested and tried for the murder of the 2 prison guards. Incredibly enough, he beat the case. But in 2001, a years-long operation called Operation Springtime rounded up 139 Hells Angels, including Maurice Bue. He was charged with so many counts of murder, it was really hard to fathom. Maurice was so violent and deadly that his actions cost almost 200 lives that we know of, which at the time was too much heat even for a gang as notorious as the Hells Angels. Maurice was kicked out of the Hells Angels as soon as he landed in prison with a life sentence. Yet somehow, throughout his trial, he behaved like a diva. He looked like he was proud of himself for being responsible for all those lives, and was all too happy to soak up the attention from what he would expect were his fans. He remained proud of his horrific actions and appeared in front of the cameras as if he were a star. On July 2022, he died from cancer in prison, alone, with no support from his friends and family. Thanks for watching. See you in our next video.